So how this is gonna work is I'm going to begin by asking them questions. And they're just gonna go for it.
Well, before you start asking us questions, Colin asked that we do a chart of where we are right now at 7 o'clock. So, can you see that? So we may be moving around a lot, as he said, it's not, so maybe you can see better that way. Okay, so one of the things that's happening tonight is that Saturn here at 29 degrees 58 is about to move into the sign of Capricorn. So that happens very close to midnight tonight, 11, I forget what time. But so we are on the cusp of this moving into Saturn, Capricorn energy. And Capricorn is the sign linked to the planet Saturn. So we'll talk more about that. But right now, tonight, we've been enjoying this rather intense way of networking, and do either of you want to say anything specifically about tonight and why half the people who signed up aren't here?
It's nice trying for the people who are here.
Absolutely.
I think there's the sun in the chart is in Sagittarius. There it is.
Yeah.
So
I'll be Carol Merrill.
So-
For those old of you to know who she is, yeah.
So as a sort of Sagittarian vibe to the meeting, you know, of on the one hand the Sagittarians are the party monsters. Yeah, right? Right? But on the other hand they're the questing philosophers. And I think for a Sagittarian it's quite a challenge to integrate those two energies. But one thing I did notice is that the sun is at 28 degrees Sag. The natal USA sun is at 23 degrees Cancer. That's almost an exact aspect, sesquiquadrate, within 2 degrees. So if, by any chance, anybody in this room has been slightly puzzled about what's going on in the country, the astrology is exact.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, I think also in terms of what we might find tonight, discover, you know, is perhaps quite a bit of what we'll talk about is in the country. And then I'd like to point out too that Uranus up at the top there is conjunct Pallas.
Alice.
So with Uranus, definitely expect the unexpected. We have some information about what we're expecting with Uranus, which, you know, I think has a foundation. But because the thing about it is you can't be 100% accurate with Uranus, because if you were, it wouldn't be Uranus. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. So the other thing to say is that there's a trine, isn't there? A grand trine.
Well, wait a minute, before we get too technical,
Oh yeah.
Uranus is known as the Great Awakener.
Right.
It's the planet of disruption, change, and revolution. It was discovered around the time of the American and French revolutions. So the other thing that's up here is the newly discovered heavenly body Eris, who's known as being the disruptor of the party. So Uranus and Eris have been traveling together, and we are in a time of extreme tension. I mean, psychiatrists are actually clocking this as a very traumatic time for their patients. People are in high anxiety. So, but another thing that's interesting is that the North Node, which is karmic destiny point, is at 15 Leo, and the eclipse in August was at 15 Leo. So the last Aquarius, right? And it was a full moon. So so basically, what's happening is we're hitting a lot of what's been building since the summer through the fall. So the next couple of weeks into the new year, well, ask us questions.
Okay, what?
Well, we are on the precipice of profound change, we all know that. So it's, Kathy, that's right, I just need to ask you to advance, I'm sorry, I forgot I had it in such a. So this is a picture of the Venus that traveled across the sun, like a beauty mark across the sun in 2012. And a lot of people were very excited about it. But this whole period since the 2000 millennium began with 2008, Pluto entering Capricorn, and then the whole 4 years into 2012 in the Mayan calendar have been a foundation that we're now building on as we go into more feminine collaborative energy. We can advance the slide, please, Kathy, and then we'll be ready for your question.
Okay. So I'm told that big celestial news tonight is that Saturn moves into Capricorn and will be in that sign until 2020. What does this symbolize and what can we expect?
Jenni? Jenni asked us to look at some other charts too, so I'll let her begin.
Yes. When Saturn moves into Capricorn, it's called the point of integrity. We all know that the solstice point is where the Earth goes, oh, I've reached the farthest I can go, let's go back. And that point of integrity is where we go back to Earth, we go back to what's real. We're no longer heading for the stars, we're making the turn. And if it wasn't for that point, we'd be out there in outer space. So when this happens, it's a return. It's a return to integrity. And things happen at this point which have very real consequences in the following few years. And we'll talk about that. But it's a moment of gravity, especially for the Northern Hemisphere because we're the furthest out. So it's a very spiritual time, but it's a time to get in touch with yourself and your roots and come back to Earth. So we're celebrating that tonight.
So it's hopeful.
Well, I think you were on winter solstice and Saturn in Capricorn.
Yes,
there was a
and it's
dovetail
very
there.
rare that the two come
Right.
together.
Right. So do you want to look at that one chart you asked for? That was,
Oh, that
could you advance 3 slides, please, Kathy? That's it. That's
Yes.
perfect.
This is what
Oh,
happened the last time, 1664. The last time the two came together, the solstice, when the sun enters Capricorn
Sun and Saturn.
and Saturn together at the same moment. And 3 things stood out for me at that moment. First of all, they laid the plans. They actually put out the stones for the Palace of Versailles. And that was pretty expensive. And they taxed the poor peasants so much that they got sick of it. And they said, off with their heads. So, plans were laid. The second thing that happened was that the English took over from the Dutch and inaugurated 3 states, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, in that year, in the following months. We're all here, we're speaking English, so we know who won. Okay. But that was the moment of switch. And the third switch that happened was Isaac Newton. There was a bubonic plague in London, and to escape the plague, he went to his summer house, which was out in the country, and the apple fell. And I'm sure it's happened many times before, but he said something's making the apple fall. So it was a pivotal moment.
I'm struck by two things. One, I hadn't noticed this before. The North Node is in Leo again. And then the other thing is when Jenni said it's a return to integrity, that's what's being demanded. Not everybody is returning to integrity, clearly. So that's why Versailles, the bricks getting laid, and it didn't go very well there. But that's what we're being asked to do. We're being asked, is your foundation sound? And if it isn't sound, you better raise that house and start again.
What year is this?
This was 1664, which was basically 100 years before our country began. Well, we're going to talk about something a little later, but when this period of time was happening, the 1400s to the 1600s was, I'm going to do some astrobabble quickly, it was the Jupiter-Saturn great conjunction that was happening in fire. It was a time of exploration. It was a time of seeking things out, like, quote, heroism, whatever that means. And so, yet, at the time when because Saturn moves very clockwork, 2.5 years about roughly in a sign to do returns every 28, 29 years. So it's plowing along, laying foundations in spite of what everything else is, what other things are going on. So we're in this incredibly chaotic time, but now basically the universe wants us to start putting down our frames. Okay, you've been chaotic for a while. Now, how are you going to build, and where are you going to build? So some people, right as we're sitting here, well, you're going to a next question. So why don't you give us
If the tax bill has already passed, what will its effect be on the economy, if any?
I think it goes back to Versailles.
Versailles.
Makes sense.
Well, they're making this decision while Mercury is retrograde, which is never good to make a contractual decision.
Dear Lord.
and they're racing it. And this is being made by people who aren't really economists. They're theorizing. So, and gambling on a lot of things that they expect will happen. So, meanwhile, Saturn's about to go into Capricorn, asking for, as Jenni said, integrity, reality.
I don't think you even need to be an astrologer to say that if somebody makes a contract that nobody's read or understands and calls it law, the chances of a favourable outcome are small. So, I'm not hopeful, to be honest.
Yeah, and
I think that, sorry to interrupt, the main thing that, I don't know if anybody knows of an example where so-called trickle-down economics has actually worked. But, since President Reagan came up with a phrase, it's been tried again and again to very little effect, right? So, it could work, but I don't think it's going to. Sorry.
Yeah. So the question becomes if this is really going to pass with the retrograde. That's the other question, because we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know. It could sort of get thrown out, which is hard to imagine right now. But again, with this outer planet energy, this is. Could you I'm sorry. Could you? Where do I want you to be? We're looking at 1664, and we actually want to move. Well, that's the U.S. chart. So if you go one back more is where we are now. No, one more. There. No. Yeah, that's tonight. To the very beginning.
before
Yeah,
the,
there.
Where is it?
Okay, so this chart basically is the one that is speaking about where we've got the Uranus Eris, which is
Yeah.
just so cataclysmic that anything could happen. Really, literally anything could happen, which isn't, you know, you're wanting us to forecast, and we basically can say that just anything literally could happen.
Anything could happen.
So stay tuned to this channel.
And I think it's likely to be quite upsetting
Upsetting.
for the population because of the Pluto Moon
Right,
conjunction in the 6th.
because basically when the tax bill is signed by the president, that becomes, in our language, an electional chart. It is the birth of the new law.
Right.
And so whatever that is, colors, basically energetically imbues the outcome of that law. And right now, with so many like things about to turn into the next sign and chaotic tenuousness, it's better to take your time and make sure you have something that has a verifiable track record
Yeah,
or ability to. Well, anyway.
to prove it.
so
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 maybe
if
we
there's,
should move on to
if there is a,
Can I just ask you a question? Is it helpful to have the brief explanations of the astrology?
Yes.
Yes,
That's okay with everybody?
absolutely.
Yeah, good,
Yeah.
good.
Okay.
so if there's a downturn in the financial markets, when will it get better?
Well, Jenni had an optimistic point of view. Why don't you say what you think?
I think right now we've got Jupiter in Scorpio, which is uncovering secrets. When it goes into Sagittarius, it's in its own sign. It's a happy place, and I think that's like October, November next year. So even if we go through all this turmoil, there is a very good period.
In October, November.
Yes,
Next year.
starting next year
Because Jupiter moves into
into Sagittarius, where it's very happy.
The crash of 1929, the recession of 1958, the downturn of 1987 are all, Saturn and Capricorn events. So whether that will happen, it's quite possible that there could be.
Well, I think Wall Street is kind of seeing this as the Trump bubble.
Yeah.
And if the Trump bubble bursts,
Then
that the rest of the world's stock markets is not had this bubble effect. It's
Right.
been much more gradual. And they're starting to see, Wall Street figures once every 10 years, the bubble bursts. So, and just because it's the stock market going down doesn't mean the whole economy goes down. It just means the economy is much more factual. So, Wall Street is waiting for the Trump bubble to burst.
I was told by a psychic that it's going to happen before Christmas.
You mean now?
Now. Yeah,
And
that's
it's
that the market's going to burst. So I just wanted to check in with you. Is that a possibility?
I think it's perfectly possible. Whether it
Astrologically, I wanted to.
astrologically, I think it's definitely possible astrologically. Of course, I'd like to issue a disclaimer and say that all prediction is 100% accurate in hindsight. So next year, let's meet again and see if it happens.
Right.
Yes.
I don't.
In fact, I talked to somebody on Wall Street today, and I said, well, you try to predict. I try to predict when neither of us always right.
Right.
Unfortunately, he's playing with big money, and I'm just playing with charts.
But it is, as Jenni said, Jupiter and Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the natural sign for Jupiter. Capricorn is the natural sign for Saturn. So in the fall, when that happens, the two authority planets, because Saturn is, to me, it's always like the two heads of Janus. Saturn is looking at the past and being very cautious about how it proceeds. Jupiter is looking, hey, let's do that. So there's a speculative quality. So I think you see a balance. So I don't know that we'll see a lot of like some of the things that have been going on now. I think that it's going to dip. It's going to start to balance. And then we'll look at the election chart for 2018 too, because that's on the heels of that. But
How is this whole cosmic situation gonna play out for Trump?
okay, could you bring up Trump?
Let's
He's
get down
like
to it.
two slides. The next one, there he is.
Okay.
Donald Trump, I have to say this. Donald Trump physically must be an amazing machine because he survived. So Saturn has gone over his moon sign in opposition to his sun. He was born at the full moon. His moon is in Sagittarius, his sun is in Gemini.
Do we know the time he was born? I mean,
We do because he announced it. I mean, it's public record. You know, he used to talk about himself ad nauseum. So this chart has been in the archive for quite some time. Now the question is it real or not?
we should assume it is.
We assume the birthday is accurate. We assume it is. I mean, some astrologers sort of argue about it, but I don't know. He's got Leo rising, but it's just about to change into the sign of Virgo. I think Jenni was talking about, he has all these food things. Of course, we know he eats crazy meals, but people with strong Virgo, whatever their routine or ritual is, they aren't all health nuts. So for him, it's the 12 Diet Pepsis a day or whatever he drinks. But he also doesn't like to touch things unless he's germophobic. So I don't really think he's Virgo rising, but I don't know. And Mars is definitely right there. He's got that helmet hair that he wears, like Mars the warrior god. But it is, I mean, he survived this very difficult Saturn transit on his sun and moon. The sun is, you know, how you want to shine in this lifetime. The moon is your emotional body.
Here's how I see it. I see if you wanted to swing the pendulum so far that there's no place for it to go and it has to swing back, would you prefer to have somebody in office who's crazy, misogynistic, sadistic, all of the bad things, or would you rather have?
But how do you really feel?
I think history is going to say this: the pendulum has swung so far in that direction that it has to get a kickback, and we're seeing that kickback. We're seeing that kickback because women are coming forward.
So he is the perfect catalyst for change,
Exactly.
but how is this going to affect Trump? You said, you jump in there. We haven't let you speak.
Well, interestingly, in this chart, there's elementally there's no Earth.
Right. Oh.
So when you're light in one element, or you just have one planet in one element, you can find that you'll naturally tend to try to compensate. So say you have one planet in Earth, it means that all the Earth element in life has to come through that point in your psyche. But Donald Trump doesn't have any Earth. So what is Earth? Earth is the physical material world, is wealth, is real estate, golf courses. You know, this is obviously a driven man who has made great compensation for this shortcoming. The element of Earth is going to be important in the next few years. Starting tonight, the planet Saturn, lord of time, form, procedure, morality, and all the rest of it, moves into cardinal Earth sign of responsibility and good conduct, is the sort of bright side of Capricorn. And at the same time, there's other Earth events coming up over the year. So the man who has no Earth, to be highly stimulated by a sort of earthy moral force be interesting to see how it plays out. There's also the just one thing I'd like to mention or offer is that as you see Mars, that Pam pointed out earlier, is there on his ascendant in the 12th house. I've always felt that he's certainly not a stupid man. He's obviously a very gifted man in many ways. I think that his ability to speak to the subconscious of the collective,
Yeah.
love him or hate him, is extraordinarily powerful. And I think it's that placement that and also of course Pluto in the 12th house of mystery. So the combination of Mars the ferocious with Pluto the lord of the underworld gives him tremendous direct line to the collective psyche, in my opinion. So I mean, the other thing that we don't talk about on the chart is that he has a very powerful fixed star placement, which we won't go into
Right.
too much, but right there. And it is the placement of the ruler, the king.
Regulus.
But there is a condition, which is you must never indulge in revenge. So
as New York and New Jersey is about to be more heavily taxed,
Right.
I don't know.
yeah, these are not good moves for someone with that
Right.
placement. So I mean, my intuition, everything I've thought about him has told me that there will be a dramatic change, but it hasn't happened yet.
Right.
So
You mean reaction?
yeah, I mean, I think as Jenni has said, what is the sort of what is the karmic purpose of Donald Trump? What is the moment of destiny in the life of the nation? What is the story that's being lived here? And on that subject, Saturn is moving through the first house of personal identity in the USA national chart. Who are we as a people?
Go back one chart.
Yeah.
It's the
There
US chart.
Yeah. So this is the natal chart.
Right.
By transit, Saturn is right about
Right.
in there.
Saturn's here.
Yeah. So all those things about rule of law, institution, concrete achievement, fine. At the same time, the planet Neptune, which is a completely different energy, fantasy, illusion, boundary issues, is moving through the third house in the USA natal chart. And so if there's confusion about national identity, there's, it's no surprise really, astrologically speaking. Do you agree?
Yeah. Want to pull some things to our attention. Saturn is going to be in opposition to the United States Venus, which is our money, what we value, our relationship with other nations, especially in trade. And then it'll be in opposition to Jupiter, which is how well we do as a nation economically. And then finally, in about a year and change, it will be really asking for our national identity. Will we be the leader of the free world anymore? Could you go back to Trump? There's
We need like cupcakes or something.
So Donald
This is
Trump,
tough.
Yeah.
when Saturn goes through his fifth house, the fifth house is your creativity, your fruit, how you take risks. So it's about love affairs, children, because children are our creative fruit. And so I think we've all agreed that when Saturn goes through his fifth house, it's really his children that I think are going to be and we are already seeing the challenges they have. They don't have the bluster and protection and the helmet that their father has. It's a different, and they kind of have been dragged into this, which not that I necessarily am saying I feel sorry for them, but it will be very interesting to see how this plays out. So there was I think we're going to take questions at the end. Let's just
Jupiter moves about 1 year in a sign and entered Scorpio this past October. What does Jupiter and Scorpio forecast for 2018?
Wow, it's been big. It's been absolutely huge. we are seeing the Me Too revolution. And, you know, however far back you go into history to cavemen, men were always in charge. Oh, too bad that he pulled you by your hair and raped you in that cave. Oh, forget about it, it'll be fine. No, it won't be fine anymore. This is the biggest revolution we have seen in thousands of years. And it's not going to go away. There are 2,000 women running for office.
And this shows in the chart?
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not just, could you just go back to the US, please? It's not just Jupiter in Scorpio, but it's created a perfect, I mean, again, Trump is absolutely the perfect catalyst. And the fact that Jupiter's gone into Scorpio with unearthing these things, and women, as we talked about earlier, with the whole rise of feminine energy. And when we say that, it doesn't mean men are going away, of course not. But it means that men.
Sure about that?
Yeah. We still need you for certain things, but
Lifting.
but it's men who are comfortable with their feminine. And we've got a bunch of, as my daughter calls them, old white guys in charge of the government that basically are not comfortable with not only women, but with anything that, any kind of people they want to suppress and keep down.
Mm-hmm.
So the rise of what's happening with women's voices is bringing up so many pieces, and I'm going to just mention briefly the United States. Let me go back in time a little. When Pluto was demoted to be a dwarf planet in 2006, Ceres, which was an asteroid, was promoted because she's the same size. So to astronomers, they're still fighting with the planet scientists who's right and what they should designate these bodies. But to astrologers, what it meant was, at last, Pluto, the god of the underworld, is now on equal footing with the goddess to the harvest and nurturing. And Ceres and Pluto are the players in one of the greatest stories in Greek and Roman mythology. And I can't really shortchange this story, but basically they share something in common. Pluto, depending on the story you heard, Pluto grabbed the goddess of spring, Persephone, and brought her down to the underworld, where he raped her and violated her and kept her. That was the story I was told in Catholic grammar school. But then when I went through certain understandings, especially Jungian, I thought, okay, so the goddess of spring, who her mother Ceres wanted to be a perpetual maiden all her life, was taken by one of the most powerful gods, Pluto, the god of the underworld, the god of death. I mean, that's as powerful and scary as a god can get. And she's brought down to the underworld, and she is made the goddess of the underworld, the queen of the underworld, one of the most powerful goddesses in the pantheon. So if she didn't enter into the arms of Pluto, who maybe it wasn't a rape, maybe it was like, okay, I'm good, I'm ready to get out of my mother's insular care. But the important thing about this story is that wherever Ceres is in a horoscope indicates, yes, how we nurture, but it also indicates how we grieve. And Americans are not comfortable with grief. And Ceres is in the sign of Pisces, and Pisces is a sign that means a gazillion things, and one of the things it means is, how do we deal with people who we consider less than? So the United States coming in, taking over with indigenous people in genocide, then our slavery legacy that we have never come to terms with, never really made atonement with, and women. And so Me Too includes a whole lot of people. So
Do you think it's a sort of part of a large, I mean, you talked about the end of the patriality, really, the dominance of the masculine, historically. I mean, do you think that, I mean, Jupiter will be in Scorpio for a year,
Right.
and then what? You know.
Well, I think, you know, the younger generation, younger than me, guys are of a very different ilk.
That's true. Yeah, my sons are. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. I agree with that.
Yes.
Totally different
So
outlook.
to them, it's
Yeah.
this is like, oh yeah, this is business as usual.
That's right. That is true.
They're much better at partnering.
Yeah.
well, Pluto and Scorpio generation
Yeah.
basically started to change things.
Yes.
And those are the people who were
Late 80s, early 90s,
Yeah.
right?
and then after them, it's like I'm the Pluto and Leo generation, and so Pluto because
so that
it's
was
so far
drug,
out.
sex, and rock and roll.
The boomers. And the interesting thing about where Pluto is today in Capricorn is one of the things it's going to be teaching us is, oh, and I forgot to mention this about Ceres in Pisces, our whole distorted way that we nurture and care for people. I mean, health insurance,
Right.
it's just crazy. So Pluto in Capricorn, wherever Pluto rides, Pluto is basically just saying, okay, I've got my chariot, I'm riding through, and you better get ready because you are going through irrevocable transformation, if you like it or not. And in Capricorn, it's about how do, as Jenni said, you do Capricorn energy. Is it with integrity? Or do you have some crazy mythology that you think you're going to live forever?
Right.
You know, do you think you're not going to die? Do you know how to do death gracefully? And that's what baby boomers are going to be wrestling with over the next 10 or 20 years. Okay, I'm sorry. You have more questions.
I do. So at the beginning of the year, you mentioned a lot is happening as we go towards 2020. And one of the things involves both of these planets, Jupiter and Saturn. Can you elaborate on what that means for the world?
Okay, I am going to ask you to go to Jenni. Oh, no. Yeah, I don't know if we touched on this yet. I'm actually looking for slide 9. So this one is slide 5. Oh, wait a minute, okay,
Keep going.
yeah. Yeah, I think that was it. Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn in 2020. Is it, or did you say Saturn, Jupiter?
Jupiter and Saturn.
Oh, okay, sorry. So
Should I look for Jupiter and Saturn?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, 17.
Jupiter and Saturn.
Yeah. So 2020 has a lot going on.
Whoa.
Yeah. Where to begin? This is the solstice of 2020.
December 21st.
Yeah, and that'll be one of the things that happens is great conjunctions.
It's very rare to have 3 planets together.
Right.
It
So
only
this is
happens once every couple of 100 years.
right.
But when you get those 3 together, it's a big pull in one area of the chart. You very often get earthquakes and floods and massive, earth shifts. But it's also earth shift in terms of understanding and going into a new era.
What What's the third planet?
Yeah, what's
Jupiter,
the
Saturn, and
And Pluto.
Pluto.
Yeah, they're close enough. They've been passing. Could you just go 2 more slides? Okay, so these are great conjunctions. Now I don't expect you guys to read any of this, but basically we are leaving the great conjunctions when Saturn and Jupiter come together in the same sign. And they've been doing it from about 1802 to 2000 in earth signs. There are 4 elements in astrology: earth, air, fire, and water. And so we're leaving 200 years of very earth-centric ways of dealing with those 2 heads of authority. Saturn, what you bring down and concretize, and what you explore and expand into. So it has a lot to do with what you value and make material. And nothing's as material as earth. You bring it down. So what was valued the past 200 years? Industrial revolution. Let's make stuff. Let's get more stuff. How much stuff can we possibly amass? And let's get money. Let's get more money. Let's have more things. So basically we're leaving that. So there was a little blip of an air sign thing that happened in 1980, and that's when the Berlin Wall fell. So that indicated what's happening now that we're entering into the 200 years of air. And so with that, we open up to valuing different things that have to do with air concepts, which is ideas, intellect, not having so much stuff.
That spirituality?
Spirituality would be nice.
We're also facing a lot of crisis with air pollution.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And part of it might be the return to space exploration. Let's go out.
Oh, okay.
The cloud. The cloud. Yeah, one of the interesting things is I read that we're all like decluttering and trying to put more and more things on these things. But these things actually use a very tiny amount of a mineral, which is becoming rarer and rarer. And I think they're mining the bejesus out of places in Africa too. They're gone. So now it's all about recycling, and that's why they want to go up to asteroids and other planets, because they want to mine.
What
this.
mineral is it?
I meant to Google it before. Does anybody know?
Well, they're actually called rare earth minerals, right?
It's a specific little.
I think it was mostly in Africa.
It was in Africa.
It's on the east, west coast.
They're lanthanides.
Okay,
They're
she's-
minerals that sit right underneath the Earth's crust. They're
Okay.
very rare.
They're very rare.
Yeah.
This
So,
is
So there's a lot. Yeah.
and you only need a tiny amount,
Right.
but we need them. We're addicted to them actually at this point.
All right.
Questions?
Well, I'm told that arguably the biggest news is that Uranus enters Taurus, which happens about every 84 years. What can we expect from this?
Destabilization.
What did you say?
Destabilization.
Oh,
When does this happen?
May 15th on the new moon. I think I have the chart
more
somewhere. I
calm.
just have to find it. It's chart 15. So it's back a little. That's it. So Uranus, as we said earlier, is the planet of revolution and change. When it entered Aries at 0 degrees, that was Fukushima. Now, I don't think that's going to happen again, because 0 degrees Aries, or the cardinal signs, is on the world axis. So something happens that gets everybody's attention. We have until 15 Taurus when that happens, because in the fixed signs, Taurus, Aquarius, Scorpio, and where's my Leo, how can I forget? That's 15 degrees, but the cardinal signs, it's 0 degrees. So Aries, Cancer, Capricorn, and Libra. So, but going into Taurus, Uranus, wherever it is, it's not comfortable, or it wants to kind of create friction in that area. So,
Let me jump in.
yeah.
With, in 1989, both Saturn and Uranus went into Capricorn. And that was the year they said tear down the wall. But it was also a number of other things. It was, do you remember the Tiananmen Square in China? 1,000 people wiped out. So it's a revolution. It's that moment of like everything that's gone before.
Right.
It's also a planet that rules innovation, right?
Yes.
So and in Taurus, you know, the Earth sign. So we could see a lot of technological advance. I mean, I think there's already been huge, you know, technological. If you think of what people like Elon Musk are doing.
Who's that?
Who is he? Tesla
okay,
and you know all that stuff, going to Mars and what have you. Be interesting, actually, as a sidebar, to wonder what astrology would look like from Mars, as and when we ever get there. You know.
Yeah, it'll totally change everything.
But back to Uranus and in Taurus, and something you said, I think, struck me very about the rise of robotics. We thought was very possible. Which, you know, we see increasing automation in manufacturing, and there are home robots, and, you know, there are all kinds of gadgets that can do all kinds of things.
And cars that can drive themselves.
Cars that can drive themselves, for example. Yeah. Astrologers that can, you don't need to call them astrology, you just,
Press a button. Right.
that'll never come. Eh? So,
And the other real thing is money.
Yes.
Oh, of
Because
course,
Taurus
yeah,
is
yeah.
money. And we're
Yeah.
already seeing that with, I think I've got that chart somewhere, Bitcoin.
right.
So money, by the time Uranus is done with its stint in Taurus, may be very different,
Very different, yeah.
than we presently know. We
That
could see,
Bitcoin,
yeah,
Yeah.
we could see total kind of, we're already starting to see it, and as the shifts continue, it's
Yeah.
like, what is our financial system? We know that with Pluto and Capricorn, that things have to change. And so the more attached they are to
So-
the old way.
So you said, so Uranus goes into Taurus next May, right? At 0
May
degrees.
15th,
Yeah. So the point of maximum stimulation will be in about 15 degrees Taurus, right?
Yeah,
So
that's a few years
3.5 years, right?
Yeah.
But and it will be approaching a conjunction with Pluto.
Yeah, because then when we go to the 2020 chart, let's look at the, could we go back to the 2020 chart? It's actually at the end. I'm sorry, I said go back.
Here's Saturn, Pluto, Capricorn, 2020.
Yes, that's good. So at that point in time, Uranus is only a 2.
23, I think
yeah.
we're thinking about, aren't we?
Yeah, no, it's going to be a while. It'll probably be close to the Pluto.
The Pluto return, right?
Which is-
Can we talk about that?
We can.
Just
I
to
don't
cheer
have the
everybody
horoscope,
up.
But we can talk about it.
So, as you
We're
remember,
suffering here.
well, we got some good news at the end.
Thank God.
So Pluto was discovered in 1930, but just because no one knew it was there doesn't mean it wasn't there. But the USA will experience a Pluto return. So in other words, Pluto would have been all the way around the zodiac, and that's in 2023, right? Yeah. So Pluto was in the USA second house of resources, which if you think about it is kind of apt. This is the only country in the world where people have experienced untold wealth, individually and collectively, on a massive scale. I think there are something like 400,000 millionaires in Manhattan. I'm not one of them yet. But I mean, the plutonic realm of resources, wealth, gold, subterranean minerals and riches, oil, gas even. I mean, the USA attitude to and use of resources, the way that resources have been exploited with very little regard to replacing, replenishing, stewarding. This may change in 2023. I think the great opportunities of our time, astrologically speaking, are these massive disruptions. Perhaps.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, at least we know we're alive, right?
And as we go towards that point, which was the initiation of our country,
Right.
and as Jenni mentioned, the building of Versailles, if we look at that, and we have sort of a royal family in office right now.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of a setup for the people to decide what it is that we want. Are we going to collectively speak up? And it's going to be it's not going to be the revolution it was in 1776. But we can see already the desire to suppress the masses by let's control the internet, let's put in more armed forces in every little small town on the planet and give them, in the nation, and give them like military weapons to keep their people quiet. I mean, this is not really comfortable when you think about it, what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But
let me inject a note of hope here, because
always,
when I said there's a revolution coming, and I said this to a friend, and he said, "Oh, they're going to get out the guns. They're going to stockpile the food." But we've just had a revolution where women came forward,
right.
bloodless.
Right.
It happened overnight. It's only happened since October.
Right.
And already it's changed all the power structures. So yes, it's possible to have a revolution where not a shot is fired.
I'm thinking about, I don't know, I heard Barbara Marx Hubbard here, and this conscious evolution that we as a human species are changing and evolving.
Absolutely.
And so I don't know where that fits in, but I just thought I would kind of...
Well, it fits in beautifully because we are, as mentioned earlier, since 2008, 2012, we are on this point where everything has speeded up.
Yes.
The spirals that we observe, we astrologers, Barbara Marx Hubbard talks about different things, but it's basically the same language. It's just she's working with certain scientific models. We're looking at how planets interact with one another in their orbits. And yes, I mean, to walk into this time of tremendous hope and vitality, and as Jenni has, as we've talked about, young people are what make me so excited, because I do know a lot of young people, and I love their, as far as they're concerned, they're just rolling up their sleeves and going into it. They aren't spooked or afraid. This is their world, and they are ready to do what they need to do. So it is amazing. But I when I mention the suppression you see these guys trying to do, the wave is, as Jenni says, it's just the numbers are not in their favor. There's just too many people who are hungry for change and ready for it.
So,
Or are we
what are your
opening it up?
predictions for 2018?
Oh, haven't we been talking about that?
I think
Oh, can we see the election chart?
Oh,
The
right.
one, is it,
Above or below?
it's at the end, towards the end. So, election, at the beginning. So, this is the United States Election Day 2018. And, Jenni was talking about how Jupiter is at election day, it's at 29 Scorpio, so it's about to go into Sagittarius. So we may not have that elation yet. And Saturn is firmly 5 degrees in opposition to the United States Venus, so people are going to be feeling a crunch. And election day is actually a very interesting chart. It's got a new moon in Scorpio. So that's very much about kind of are we willing to resurrect and do things like transform? Thoughts?
It's another one on the brink.
Right, and Uranus is 29:59. It's a couple of days away from when it turns into Taurus. So it's going to be like the last.
that's right. So it's been in Taurus, right?
No,
Didn't it
went
and
in
it went-
Taurus and then it went retrograde.
Right.
And
So this is it's
so
stationary.
it's
That's correct.
kinda,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
So what does
Yeah.
that mean?
Yeah,
Yeah,
really.
so
Well,
what the
again, it's one of
translate is-
these anything can happen horoscopes.
Yes.
But I do think, as Jenni said, I mean, you've got Venus and Ceres. These are female, they're goddess energies at 27 Libra. Venus is retrograde, which again means I think people are not going to be feeling this trickle down thing. They aren't going to be feeling like a lot of
So are you saying that people are going to be, there will be even more activism? Is that what you're saying?
Oh yeah, it's not going away. It is so not going away. Because this is just so strongly about activism is also about how are we connected.
Right.
A lot of the schism in the United States chart is it's a Cancer nation. It was born on the 4th of July. So there's a love of land, there's a love of home, a love of family. But the moon is in the sign of Aquarius. So there's this sense of the rugged individual, my separate thing. But now we're at a point where we're a mature nation, whether we know it or not. And so it's like the adolescent energy really isn't serving us anymore. So is it in, I mean, again, young people are not, I'm sure there are exceptions, but as a mass, they don't want that big house in the middle of nowhere. They want to live in a community where they can move around and get like cosmopolitan things happening. That's what they're looking for.
They tend not to vote.
They tend what?
They tend not to vote.
No, they're voting.
No,
think so?
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They're
And
voting
they're saying,
a lot more.
Not my daughter's age.
Yeah, 20,
20s.
20, 30. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
20, 30, yeah,
They're
active.
voting.
They're politically active.
Statistically, compared to maybe 15, 20 years ago, this group is voting more.
Yes.
They're
Glad to
definitely
hear.
voting. Sorry?
Good. Glad
Yeah,
to hear.
yeah. But you also have situations like my daughter, who is very politically and socially active.
How old is she?
She's 20. Some of her friends come from families that never voted because it's not unusual for families where they weren't encouraged to vote. Island people, African American background, and so her friends. Some of them, it's the first time in a generation that people are saying, "I'm going to vote," because they come from families like it's not going to make any difference anyway, or somebody's not going to let you vote, and so there's not really a motivation. But
I think with so many planets right on the verge of change,
yeah,
it's going to be, you know, that election day is like unsettled, but we want change.
Right.
So it
We've
looks
had
like,
enough.
yeah, you're right.
Like
So it looks like the
what's
next day
happening
will be
in Alabama.
a new landscape.
Yes.
So what I'd love to see is more parties, like, well, that guy who was like,
Yeah.
the rent's too damn high, did anybody ever see that guy from New York State, the rent's too damn high party? I mean, you know, we need more parties, that's another thing that's just kind of polarizing us as a nation, we're so polarized.
When you're talking about, you know, for the change, ready for change, but we can't assume the change is for what we want as change, because then you have these other people,
Sure.
like Bannon type, who
Sure.
thinks he's a revolutionary in change and represents that undercurrent that we don't, you know, we live in
Yeah.
right. So
You're
they
absolutely
may
right.
be saying our turn now too, and we're the revolutionaries. So we're assuming, because we're an East Coast environment, and
Well,
women.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, there could be what we interpret as evolution. These
Sure.
people may be saying, but we are there too.
But it
So
could
then
be,
that-
it could also be very radical. I'm talking about more parties. I could also, I'm not gonna forecast this absolutely, but I could also envision people getting together and saying, why are we one big country?
Why
So,
are we? Yeah.
why are we one big
Yeah.
country? Maybe the South wants to be a country
Yeah.
and the North wants to be a country. I mean, maybe we totally reconfigure. We're not gonna do this by 2018,
No, it could be.
but as we go towards 2020, it might be something that's discussed. It could be more states' right, you know, where certain states say, we're gonna work as a collective. New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, we're gonna become, you know, our own little collective and we're going to have certain things going on this way.
There's also the global oneness that's happening more and more around the world.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, astrologically, is there any way to look at, you know, to see whether that's going to get big? I know the Prime Minister of Canada is really big on global oneness.
It's America, the United States has to decide if they're part of the party, or as we talked about earlier, are we no longer, not only we aren't the leader of the free world, but we're not even invited to the party. And so, you know,
Yeah.
but is that decided by people who are in government now, or do the people basically continue to rise up and ride away?
May I ask a question? So how, I'm asking for myself, how do I be in 2018? How do I be? I heard you say, the panel say, really look to your foundation and strengthen and shore up your foundation. Is that how I be in 2018? This is very Sagittarian. I
Sure.
know. Shoring up the spirituality and the
You be an expert in your field and your integrity. You be a teacher. All of we who are holistic practitioners, Saturn and Saturn in Capricorn, we need to be experts, educators, strong on our truth, and provide hope.
Great answer, right?
I needed it.
Wow,
I also
that's
think
really good.
we've talked a lot about Saturn and this transition from fire Sagittarius to Earth Capricorn. I think Sagittarius is a great time to plan, to dream, to, you know, what if, all that. Capricorn Sagittarius is a great time to make it happen.
Yeah.
And it's going to be easier to make it happen.
It feels
So on
that
a
way.
personal level, I think, I think there's quite a lot of energy available in the first part of the year because all the planets are direct.
Yes.
Once we get through Mercury retrograde.
When-
That'll slow down in the middle of the year, but I think the first few months, things can happen personally. You know, we've talked about the collective. Well, we can all affect that, of course, in a very small way. But for us personally, I think there can be some, you know, clearing out, simplification, and manifestation. I also heard one thing which I really liked recently. I don't know, I just turned 60. You're shocked, I know. Okay, but I did. Which means I've just been through my second Saturn return. So what I heard was, after the second Saturn return, don't get involved with any project unless your heart is really in it. And I think that's fabulous. And I thought, you know what, that's right. Because at this point you're realizing I haven't got all the time in the world.
Right.
Why would I do something I don't, you know?
You're not interested in.
Yeah. So I think that relates to what you said. How to be.
So are we open for questions?
We are
from the
open to
floor?
questions,
Did
yeah.
you get any questions?
Can you just say
Sure.
that? So can you go back and just explain, you said something about the chart of the United States and the problem with the masculine. I don't remember, you were suggesting something about that, I was wondering if we could return to that.
Let's have a look at it. Can you?
Yeah,
We have to
you
go into
just,
this?
yeah, you just have to put the password.
Well, I mean, we talk a little bit about the chart of the states. There are different versions. And the one that we've been working with has Sagittarius rising. The personality of the country, you know, is big, warm, open-hearted, generous, hospitable, welcoming, also deeply religious. All these are Sagittarian qualities. The solar identity of the states, the story it's living out in its nationhood, is Cancer, Cancer Sun. Well, Cancer is extremely nurturing sign, but also tremendously sensitive, easily offended, you know, prone to retreat, and not easy to read. Yeah. It seems to resonate somewhere. So you have this solar identity in the 7th house of relationships. So America has made enormous connections globally, and has often told people what to do elsewhere. In terms of masculine and feminine, we should look at the placement of. Here we are. Right.
That's election day. So the U.S. chart, I think, is like the 3rd or 4th slide at the very beginning.
Can you talk
There
a
it
bit
is.
about Australia and England? Because
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one. So one thing I noticed in the run up to the election, I think we talked about this in January. If some people went, yeah. I did notice that both Bernie and Donald had their natal Uranus 8 degrees either side of the USA Uranus. Now USA Uranus is there, is over here. There it is, in the 6th house in Gemini. And I thought both of those gentlemen spoke to we've talked about various characteristics in the USA chart. One of them is technological innovation. It's led the world, you know, almost since the beginning of its nationhood. And I thought that both of those guys were offering an innovative paradigm. Whatever you think of the quality, it was something different, anything different. Whereas the main opponent, whatever her virtues, was really offering the same old stuff.
Right,
you know.
yeah.
And I think there was a desperation in the country at large for something different, anything different. Don't just tell me what I've always heard. Sort of. So, plus, you know, and in my opinion, the reason that Trump won was that extraordinary ability to speak to the subconscious. But in terms of masculine and feminine, what do you think, ladies? I don't know. I mean, you did talk about the feminine, the rise of the feminine, and that was very interesting what you said, Pam, about the relationship between Pluto and Ceres.
Right.
And I think that does apply, absolutely right. But there are older figures. Pluto in the Greek is Hades, in the Roman is Pluto.
Right.
But in the Babylonian is Ereshkigal, who is a feminine deity, a female deity, and a terrifying one.
Yeah. And
Yeah. So I mean, also
Australia and the UK.
right.
Missed
The
those.
Australia
We're
chart.
running
You
out of
may
time.
find the Australian
So-
chart because there's one extraordinary thing that I just noticed really. There. I was born in London, England, but brought up in Australia.
Oh.
There's no water in this chart.
Oh my goodness.
And if you've ever been,
Australia.
I mean, it's surrounded by water, continental island. But it's, of course, very drought prone and arid country. It's very, yeah.
So it also, it natally has Saturn in Capricorn conjunct its Sun, so it will be having the Saturn return.
Well, yes, it will. And also, that's really interesting because there's a lot of action in Sagittarius, right?
Yeah.
So the Australian character shares with the USA character that open, welcoming, experimental party monster type energy. But Sun Saturn conjunct in Capricorn is
Oh, and the moon's in Taurus.
well, right, yeah. So profoundly, I mean, Saturn is the disciplinarian of the zodiac. So Saturn is what demands you to get it right. And Australia was founded as a penal colony.
Yes.
It's very witty, really, of the astrology to kind of point that out in a way.
They only just allowed same-sex marriage too.
Well, no, but actually, interestingly, you could your common law partner of the same sex could have citizenship rights at one point.
I see.
Australia has got a very interesting relationship with America because, well, there's a military installation right in the middle of Australia, owned by the Americans, called Pine Gap. And no Australian official is allowed in there. So no Australian knows what goes on. Anyway,
Oh
there's
my
a lot more I can
gosh.
say.
Do you want to say anything about Australia, or should we just go to the UK?
Talk to me.
I think, well, the penal thing, but also the, Sun conjunct Saturn.
Yeah.
If you find that in a natal chart, it's that the father is a heavy influence,
Yeah.
and the Sun is kind of overshadowed by this. So I think Australia is a leader, but it's overshadowed by its past.
Well, and also it's still part of the, constitutionally,
Yes.
the Queen is the constitutional head of state. Of course, we're talking about European Australia, we're not talking about. I recently discovered that I have 3.25% Aboriginal blood.
Where did that come from? Who got in the mix?
There's a
Well,
story
my
there.
grandfather.
So the UK, I think, is it might be behind this. No,
Yeah, there we are. And this is the 1801, right?
Yeah, I resonate with the 1066 really.
You wanna see
But both of those are Capricornian, right?
Yes, but the 1066 much more so.
Jenni wants the William I one. She's,
Ah,
and she's the Brit, so
There
she
it is.
gets to
Yeah.
decide.
And since England is going through Brexit, and they're going to see all the hardship of the Capricorn, they're going to see,
Right, so Saturn will be traveling up here,
Yes.
and then Neptune is moving through Pisces, which is really interesting. So what that means
Yeah.
is that there's dissolving while there's new structure.
Yes.
And they have to do like soul searching to decide who they really are.
Right.
Neptune's a difficult energy for people who like a lot of structure, but what Neptune's trying to do is encourage you to get into your spiritual side and go beyond.
the whole fact that the prince is
right.
now allowed to marry this American woman who's divorced, where
And of
and
color.
Queen, the
Yeah,
princess
that's
Anne
right.
will marry.
Amen.
And what?
And of color.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, because
Well, I also think it's interesting that there's been a lot of shows like there's The Crown.
Yeah.
There's several, stories that are telling some of the understory. The connection to Nazi Germany. There's some more coming out about Victoria. I just think it's interesting that there's like little people shining light on things that we didn't really.
Yeah, I reckon the disclosures will continue, particularly in the USA. And the reason is that Pluto is approaching opposition. In the USA chart, you have the Sun and Mercury at 13 and 24 degrees. And Pluto is coming to the midpoint. So Mercury in the national chart would represent the media. disclosures about figures in the media have started to happen. I believe they will continue. Because Pluto reveals and makes known what is secret and hidden. I'd like to say, generally, I think it is, you don't have to be an astrologer to understand that we're living in a time of enormous challenge, socially, environmentally, politically, financially, in every forum and every context. And, the survival of the species is really at stake in many ways, I believe, certainly environmentally. Well, I recently read a book which I liked very much, which was written by some Vedic astrologers who, it's the same astrology, it's just shifted 2/3 of one sign. And it was written by people who follow Yogananda, third generation. Well, Yogananda's teacher was an astrologer, and he works with the Hindu cycle of the 4 ages. Well, I grew up in early studies thinking we're in the Kali Yuga, the age of iron. But according to these astrologers, that's not true. We've actually come into the very early stages of the ascending Bronze Age. And I think there's a lot of evidence, there's a very plausible argument. And these people say that the transition from the age of iron, which is complete barbarity, began in about 1700 through to sort of 1900, the beginnings of the new paradigms of rationalization, physical science, and industrialization. And that now in the early stages of this age, where the most of the advances will be technological, if you consider the speed of technological advance in the last 100 years, it really defies, not even the science fiction writers can keep up with it. It's so fast.